Okay. Good evening. Okay. Daf Yomi for the week is sponsored by Rabbi and Evelyn Kislasi B'schus Refuah Shlema for Eliezer ben Elisheva, and Daf Yomi is also sponsored by the week by Ryan and Talia Bernkoff in honor of Nathan's request to join Daf Yomi, and we will not have the whole speech tonight. Baruch Hashem. Okay, the condensed version. We only embarrass you for one night. We do not embarrass you continuously for all week. That is not part of the thing. We are at Tani Bar Kapara on Chaf Zayin on base 27b, about 22 lines down was my estimated best guess. Tani Bar Kapara. Amen. Tani Bar Kapara. Bar Kapara taught as follows. We're trying to figure out why it is that when it comes to birds, you slaughter one of the pipes, trachea or esophagus, or specifically the esophagus. We'll see. We'll discuss that. Or, by animals, you have to slaughter both. So, Bar Kaparis teaches us as follows: Zos Toras habahema v'ha'of. This is the rule when it comes to the animal and the bird. And hitil hakosav la'of bein behema ledagim. This pasuk tells us these are the rules by what we're the whole pasuk is Zos Toras habahema v'ha'of v'chol nefesh hachaya, and any other living animal haromeses b'mayim that swims in the sea, which is fish. Right, so basically, these are the kosher animals on the list. So hitil hakosav la'of bein behema ledagim. The bird goes between animals and fish. How so? L'chayvo b'shnei simanim iyafshar. Right, you can't say it's got to have both pipes severed because kvar hukash ledagim, because it's being compared to fish. Right, you're going to say it's basically birds are somewhere between animals and fish. Can't say it needs both because fish don't need anything. They don't need shchita at all. So it's a little like fish. And lepotro below klum, and to say it doesn't need shchita at all, efshar, that you can't say, because kvar hukash lebehema, because we said it's already like an animal. Thank you. Ha-ketzad. So how do we solve that problem? Hechsher b'siman echad. One, right? Slaughtering one. Somewhere between animals get two, birds get one, fish get none. Dogim delav b'nei shchita ninhu minolan. How do I know that fish don't get shchita? So, lema, we need scuba diving equipment. Lema, maybe we'll say, mishum dichsiv.
And a spear.
And a spear, a knife. Mishum dichsiv, because the pasuk says, hatzon ubakar yishachet lehem, that the sheep and the cattle you shall slaughter for yourselves. Im eskol digei hayam ye'asef lehem, and all of the fish of the sea you shall gather. So, basifa ba'al masagilahu. That means all you got to do is gather the fish, right? No need for shchita. Elamayata. If that is the case, that's Bamidbar Yud Aleph. That is not this week's parsha. It's either this week's parsha or next week's parsha. Elamayata. If that is the case, so then Gabi Slav Dirsiv, what it says by this is this week's parsha, right? Then by the quail, right? That come in, they're complaining. What about all the right? We miss all the fish that we ate in Mitzrayim. That's what they're complaining in this week's parsha. Right, so amazing. Daf Yomi gets the tie-in, right? This week's parsha, we have all the they don't want to eat man anymore. They remember the fish that they're eating in Mitzrayim that they were able to gather together. So what does it say by the Slav, by the birds? Vayesvu kol Slav. They gathered all the quail up. So then hachinami lav v'shchita, that they don't need shchita. Then for birds don't need shchita either. You just said that you can't say birds get nothing because we compared them to behema. Shikvar huklish behema. So hasam there by the quail loksiva asifa b'mokom shchita de achrini. When it talks over there by the quail, right? It's talking about gathering it up. That's not when they killed it, right? They gathered it all together, right? That's not by the section which is talking about slaughtering. Hacha, but here where it's talking about the slaughtering of or not slaughtering the fish, is ksiva asifa b'makom shchita dachrini. It says that we remember shechting, we shechted the animals and the birds, and we gathered the fish. Well, the fact that it changes the language from shechting to gathering means that it's intentional. Right?
How do you shecht a mermaid though?
You don't. Not kosher mermaids. Dorash over Galila. So a certain traveling Galilean, right? He was Dorish the following. We have a quote for who is it? That is a person's name is all it says. He lived in Galil. Either that's his name, he's over Galila, or that was what he was doing. He was traveling through the Galil. Behema shenivres minha yabasha, an animal which the source of its creation during the Sheshish Mebrachis was the land, right? It was gathered up from the dirt of the land. Hechshera shnei simanim. Then the kashrus of it is 2 simanim. Dogim shenifra'u min mayim, but fish that come from water and they have a weaker hold on life. Hechsherin bivlo klum. They don't need any shechita at all in order to kill them, in order for them to be kosher.
Just take them out of the water. Take them out of the water.
Just take them out of the water. That's it. When it comes to birds, shenivra min harakak, they are mud. Birds came from mud, so there's a mixture of water and land. I don't know, there must be some Kabbalistic thing to this, right? Hechsheru b'siman echad, all you need is a single siman. Amar Rav Shmuel Kaputika, great names, right? So Rabbi Shimon Kaputka says, Teda, you should know that, Cherry, Ofos yeshlein kashkeshes beraglehem kedagim. Take a look at birds. They have scales on their feet. Right, the birds have scales on their feet, so you can see that you imagine like a bird foot, right? It kind of has scales like a fish, so it's kind of a little bit, there's a little water in there. Ve'od shalu, they also this is ve'od shalu, which Rashi says the Kontrikon, who was the general of the Romans, he was asking Rabbi Gamliel a bunch of questions, and because that's what we're talking about, questions being asked to Rabbi Gamliel in this section. But Tosfos suggests that this question was not asked to Rabbi Gamliel. This was Rabbi Yochanan. These are questions asked to Rabbi Yochanan and Zakkai, right? That Rashi says is Rabbi Gamliel. That he says that whenever it says v'od shalu, and then they further asked, this was a series of questions that the Roman generals were asking Rabbi Yochanan and Zakkai. But in any event, this is the question that he had. He says, Kosav Echad Omer, one pasuk in Bereshit says, Vayomer Elokim Yishritu Amayim Sheretz Nefesh Chaya V'Of Yofef. The water shall become teeming with life and birds that fly. Alma Mimaya Ibro. That means that birds were created out of the sea. Ksiv, then it says in the pasuk next parak, Vayitzer Hashem Elokim min ha'adama. Hashem created from the ground kol chayas hasadeh, all of the animals of the field, ves kol of hashemayim, and all of the birds. Ama me'ara ibaru. That seems to indicate that they were from the ground. So Amar Lo, so which Rabbi Gamliel or Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai, one of them, min harakak nivru. They were created out of mud. So therefore, that's a synthesis of the 2 psukim.
Weren't you also created out of mud back in the day?
We were created out of earth, right? Adama, right? Adam is from Adama, so therefore we're from the earth, not from the mud. Ra Talmidav mistaklim zabazeh. His students, right, again, whether it was Rabbi Gamliel or Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai, they were astonished by that answer. They thought that can't be what he means, right? Amar lehem. So he said to them, Kasha beinechem shedachisi es oivi bekash. He says, what? You're upset that I gave him an answer which was weak like straw, my enemy, right? So I didn't really want to give him a full answer, right? It doesn't matter. As long as he's going to accept the answer, that's fine. Rather, min hamayim nivru. Everybody knows birds come from the water. Everybody knows that. V'lama haviyan el ha'adam. So why were they being brought, right? The pasuk says that the animals were created from the ground, and the birds also came along. Not that the birds were created from the ground, but the birds also came along. What were they doing? They were all showing up to Adam Harishon, and they were introducing themselves. Why were they doing that? Likros lehen shem. They were all getting their names. Adam Harishon was telling every animal, this is your name, this is your name, this is your name, because every name, everybody knows that Lashon HaKodesh is very important because the word in Lashon HaKodesh tells you the essence of that thing. So Adam Harishon was looking at all of the animals and naming them and basically giving them their natural instincts. So therefore that was what they were. V'yesh omrem, the others say it was the reverse. Beloshon acher, they say I have a different version of the story. Amar also hegmon, he told the general, or the governor, or whoever it was, a hegmon, hegemony, is that? Yeah. Right? Hegemon. So he says, ubeloshon harishon, that he says that he gave the first answer, Amar lehen l'talmidov, that's what he told his students. Yeah. Right?
The Roman general.
The Roman general. So he just told his students that it was that the actual answer was that they were made from mud. Mishum dichsiv al vayitzer, because it says that they were created in the second pasuk. So therefore he said that was the merger between the two. And he gave the other answer that they were going to Adam Harishon to get a name. That was the non-true answer. So I guess lost to history, which is the real answer and which is the fake answer. But one of them is real, one of them is fake. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Mishum Rabbi Yitzchak ben Pinchas. Rabbi Yehuda said, Rabbi Yitzchak ben Pinchas, Ein shchita la'of min Torah. The shchita of a bird is not a Torah rule, meaning that there's no source for it in the Torah.
Which were from Midrabanan?
I think so. I think that's what it means to say. Right? I think that's what it's saying. Right? You don't have to, if you kill it another way, it's not nevela. That's the idea. Shenamar, as the pasuk says, v'shafach, right? It says, I'll read the whole pasuk, v'ish mi b'nei Yisrael, a human being from the Jewish people, u'min hager hagar b'socham, or any of the converts from amongst them, asher yatzud tzeid chaya, of who catches a wild animal or a bird, asher yeyachel, which he's going to eat. Then the pasuk says, v'shafach, the blood of the animal spill on the ground, v'chisohu ba'afar, we have a mitzvah to take dirt and cover the blood. Okay, so that's this pasuk of covering the blood. B'shvicha bi'oma sagi. So that means the blood needs to spill onto the ground, right? It doesn't need to be with shchita. It's catching a bird or a chaya. All that has to happen is when the blood spills on the ground, you need to cover it. Okay, so there's no need for shchita for a bird. Ihachi, if that's true, chaya nami. What about the wild animals? You catch a deer, so you don't have to do shchita. All you got to do is just kill it whenever you want. So itkish lipsule hamukdoshin. The answer is, you might think so, but animals, non-domesticated animals, are compared to invalid sacrifices. As it says in the pasuk, Bisharecha tochelenu hatamei v'ator yachdav kitzvi v'chayal. If you have an animal which was designated as a sacrifice, so obviously it has special rules to it because it's a sacrifice. What if it develops a blemish and it becomes redeemed? Once it's redeemed, then there's no special rules for how you eat it. You can eat it like any other animal. And the Torah wants to tell you what other kinds of animals? Like a chaya, like a deer, right? A deer isn't a sacrifice. So therefore you could eat this sheep, which got a blemish, once it's redeemed, like any deer with no other special sanctifications. And
what did have the blemish for after you caught it?
Sorry, it really wouldn't matter, right? When the blemish occurs, as long as the blemish is occurring before you're slaughtering it, right? So the point, though, is that it is compared to a deer in that the deer, just like a sheep needs to be slaughtered, shechted properly, so does a deer. So therefore, that's how we know that a chaya doesn't just have its blood spilled, it needs to have a shechita. But the bird, which is not compared to these other offerings, so then we're just going to follow what the pasuk says, which is that when its blood spills on the ground, so then we cover it, and that's it. So of nami itkish lebehema. What are you talking about? I've got another location where birds are compared to domesticated animals, and just as we know that a domesticated animal, as it says v'zavachta, as we had in those psukim that we had before, or from shchita v'shachta, so we know that you're supposed to do slaughtering to an animal, to a domesticated animal. So a bird is connected to a domesticated animal. Dichsiv, as the pasuk says, Zos Toras habahema vehaof. This is the rule by a domesticated animal and birds. So that is where we know that you have to do shchita from the neck. So the answer is haksiv v'shafachas damo. So he says, well, the Gemara says, well, yeah, but it says that its blood spills. So that means that it doesn't have to be done with shchita. So machazis lishad yelei al. So therefore, what you see is there is a comparison between domesticated animals and chayos, and there is a comparison between domesticated animals and birds. So one of those two, but we know that chayos and birds, both of them say that you don't have to do shchita by them. So how are we going to solve that problem? The answer is one of those two, either chayos or birds, you just spill on the ground and you don't need shchita. The other one does need shchita. So now, which one of the two did you pick? Why did you decide that it's the bird that doesn't need shchita? Shadia achaya. Why don't you say it's the non-domesticated animal that doesn't need shchita? The answer is mistabra mishum desolik minei. The answer is that makes more sense to compare it because the pasuk says the non-domesticated animal and the bird shall pour on the ground. So therefore, we know that the last thing that mentioned is the bird that gets poured on the ground. So that makes more sense. It's the bird that the blood gets poured on the ground without shchita, not the non-domesticated animal. So this is Rabbi Yehuda, right? Rabbi Yehuda, who says in Rabbi Yitzchak ben Pinchas that you don't need shchita for birds, right? Obviously, we don't hold that way. Meisvei. So now we're going to have this question because this is not the opinion, the shita of most. So now we're going to question the shita. We're going to try to bring proofs against it. Meisvei. So we ask the following question. Hashochet, somebody who's doing shchita, v'nisnab lo biyado, and he messes up the shchita, and now the bird becomes a non-kosher animal in his hand. Hanocher, if somebody is puncturing the simanim, the trachea, the esophagus, and kills the bird with not a proper shchita. Ha'me'aker, somebody who removes the trachea and the esophagus from its connecting tissue in the mouth, in the neck of the animal. So potter milichsos, you don't have to now cover the blood. Why? Because the shechita is not valid. The Torah only requires you, it seems to be, that you are only required to cover the blood of the bird if you've done a kosher shechita. If you've not done a kosher shechita, then the covering of the blood is unnecessary. Now, iyamart in shechita lo'of min Torah, if you tell me that there's no shechting from the Torah, so then nichira so zuhi shechita so liboy kisui. So then why do you need shechita? Right? You can kill it any way you want, and it's kosher. You can eat it. So then that means that if you can eat it, then that means if I took an axe and chopped its head off, the blood on the ground needs to be covered because it's a kosher animal. It's a kosher bird now. Must be that it needs to be shechita. So another question, right? Fair point. Toshma, another question from Bryce. Shochet, somebody who's doing shechita, and it says v'tzorech ledam. Now the person needs the blood, so he doesn't want to cover the blood up because he wants to use the blood for something. So now he's got a bird, and we're going to see whether it's a bird that we're talking about or not. He needs the blood. Chayev lichasos. Too bad. You've got to cover the blood. There's mitzvah, positive commandment. If you don't cover the blood, you are ignoring a positive commandment.
And could make it tummy?
Tummy doesn't matter because it's not a korban, right? It doesn't matter. You can eat that doesn't make it non-kosher if it's just because it's tummy. So Kate said, who else is? So what should you do if you need the blood? Oh no, crow. Kill it without shechita. Because if you kill it without shechita, then you could take the blood. You're not planning to eat it anyway. You need the blood. You don't need the meat. So
if you don't eat it, you keep it on the korban and sick, don't you?
No, right? The animal for a korban, a bird for a korban needs malika, right? This is just, we need the blood. We just want the blood. We're just you see what purpose the blood can serve, right? There are utilitarian purposes for the blood of the animals. So my lav ba'of, aren't we talking about a bird? I need the blood of a bird, and where are you going to get some chicken blood? So the answer is, you break its neck and you get some chicken blood, and then you feed it to your dogs, right? And then I can keep the blood. If I do shechita, then I'm going to need to cover that blood, and I can't use the blood. So that's into kaboyle lidame linicha. And what do you need the blood for? The blood for is it is useful for putting on wool in order to keep moths off of the wool. Now, like nowadays, we keep things like a cedar closet or whatever it is. But I guess in those days, that was a good method for protecting your wool from the moths eating it. And you put some blood on it, and the moths stay away from it.
What to do now?
Right? So that's right. You know what to do. Right? Go to the dollar store, pick up some chicken blood. Right?
Bloodstained garments.
That's what you got to do. So the answer is no, that's not what we're using the blood for. It's bechaya. We're talking about non-domesticated animal blood, deer blood. The kaboyle lidme lalaka. This is used for dyeing garments, right? You need some red dye, right? Blood was a good ingredient for dye. Right? Unless you had the all commercial that would show like a big blood stain that they would pour the all on and remove it. Right? Blood is an excellent dye. It's pretty permanent. Okay? So therefore, we're not necessarily proving from there that birds need shechita because they can. So Tashma will try again. This is by a korban Yehuda. This one we're talking about a korban. So he's got a bird that he's bringing as a korban. You know, you're supposed to use your fingernail and you're supposed to kill it from the back of the neck. Malak bisakin. What if he uses a knife instead of his fingernail? The kohen uses a knife instead of a fingernail. Metame begodim abeis habliya. The animal is the bird is a nevela, and if he eats it, if the kohen eats it, it's going to make him tame when he swallows it, right? Because it's a real nevela animal. So now, if you're going to tell me there's no shchita from the Torah, I understand that if you take a knife and you hit it from the back of the neck and you sever the spinal cord and you break the spine, so you're going to make the animal a treifa before it dies, right? Because the animal dies when you are going to sever either the trachea or the esophagus, and you're going to get to the neck first. So the animal's a treifa, but then tahani lo sakin latara midei nevela, but the knife is still going to kill the animal, which means that it's not a nevela. A nevela is worse, right? You eat it, it makes you tummy. A treifa doesn't make you tummy. So if you cut it from the back of the neck, it's not a nevela, it's a treifa. So therefore, right, the shrita. So it seems clear, right, that the shrita is not right. The shrita is purifying it from the nevela aspect of it. So now, if you're going to hold that there's no need for shchita, so then killing the animal anyway, killing the bird anyway you want, is going to make it not a nevela, right? Because it's kosher, right? It's only because it needs a shchita that chopping it from behind with a knife is invalidating it, because now you're doing drisa, you're pushing down, you're doing some other kind of a method of killing it, so that's going to invalidate your shchita, and if you invalidate your shchita, that's why it's a nevela. Okay, so that's their proof. So the Gemara says, no, you really can't ask against Rabbi Yehuda from that Mishnah, because Huda Amar Kihai Tana, maybe Rabbi Yehuda holds like this Tana that says, Detanya, we're in a brisa, Rabbi Elazar Kafar Rabbi Omer, Rabbi Elazar Kafar, the son of Rabbi says, Ma Talmud Lomar Ach Kasher Ye'achel Es Hatzvi. Why does the pasuk say that when you have a animal that has become blemished, that you can eat it like you eat a deer or a mountain goat or a ram, or whatever it is? What are we learning from? What's the comparison? Why are we comparing it to a non-domesticated animal? Me'ata harezeh ba lelamed. So the answer is because the whole point was that the pasuk seemed to be implying that we want to teach that just as the chaya needs has no sanctification, so too this sheep that gets blemished has no sanctification. But really, nimtza lamed, it also winds up teaching us something about the chaya, which is makish tzviva ayol l'psulei mikdoshin, to compare the deer and the non-domesticated animals to the domesticated animals, mapsulei mikdoshin b'shchita, just as the animals that are brought for a korban need shchita even after they are blemished. Af tzviva ayil, also the non-domesticated animals need to have shchita, so they need shchita. Oaf. But when it comes to birds, ein lo shchita min divrei Torah, they don't need shchita from the Torah. Ela midivrei sofrim, it's only rabbinic, right? The only reason we do a shchita for birds is midrabanan. So, man tana de polig alei Rabbi Elazar kafar. So who is the opinion? Okay, so we know there's somebody who's the opinion who disagrees. So this is clearly, there's a source for this now, and it's in a brisa, so it's in a Mishnah that there is an opinion, Rabbi Elazar kafar, who holds that birds don't need shchita. So who's the opinion that disagrees? Rabbi, the opinion of Rabbi says that shchita from birds is from the Torah. Tanya, we learn in a brisa, and he says like this: Rabbi Omer, the pasuk says, v'zavachta, that you shall slaughter mi bakarchu mitzonacha asher nasa Hashem lach kasher tzivisicha. You shall slaughter your cattle, your sheep, just like I have commanded you. So now, what do you mean, like I commanded you? We don't see the command. The answer is Melamed shenitztava Moshe al havesht ve'alakane. Moshe Rabbeinu was told, not in the text, but outside of the text. Moshe Rabbeinu got told that you're supposed to do shchita in the neck, and you're supposed to sever the trachea and the esophagus, v'alrov echad ba'of, and one of the either the trachea or the esophagus by the bird, one of the two pipes, v'alrov shnaim behema, and most of the two pipes is enough by animals. All of those details were told to Moshe Rabbeinu, and the pasuk hints at it. When Moshe Rabbeinu was told about shchita, Hashem says, "Yeah, do shchita like I told you." So we didn't actually have it written down in the Torah what Hashem said to Moshe, but since it's like, where you're like, you stepped into part of the conversation. You heard the part where he says, yeah, remember what I told you before? And so now we know there was another conversation that occurred, and that's the source. Okay, we're on Chaf Chasam and Aleph. We're about almost halfway down. Echad ba'of. The Mishnah says that when you slaughter a bird, you only need to sever one of the pipes. Itmar. So we said about this, Rav Nachman says, O vesht o kone. right? You can choose. Does not matter which one you do. Either the vesht, which is the esophagus, or the koneh, which is the trachea. You can do either one of those two. Rav Ada bar Ava Omar, Rav Ada bar Ava says, no, vesht velo koneh. Did I get it backwards? I say it backwards, right? The trachea is the one that the vesht is the trachea, right?
The shochet makes
Which one's
either the
trachea, the vesht is the esophagus?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I'm always going to mess them up. Vesht, so he says that all you got to do, right? You got to do the esophagus, but you cannot just do the trachea. The trachea is not enough. Now, there's a couple of rules that we are going to just mention, things that we should sort of know, as we mentioned a little bit in passing in the past, and that is that the esophagus is a way more delicate pipe than the trachea. If the animal has any kind of a hole in its trachea, it can survive. It's not a tropha, but any hole in the esophagus at all is going to kill. The animal is considered a tropha. The only way for the trachea to be considered a tropha is if it's the majority of it. If the majority of the trachea, that's why we had in the case where we're talking about shechting inside, cutting into the animal. About a week and a half ago, we had mentioned where there was already a hole in the trachea, and he happened to cut into it. Well, what do you mean? There's a hole in the animal trachea? No, the answer is if the animal is not a tropha unless the majority of the trachea is severed. So if he finds his knife into a trachea that's not quite, but about halfway open, and he cuts a little bit further, then that's kosher shchita, because that's fine, right? But Rav Ada bar Ava is saying that when it comes to bird, when we say that it needs to be one of the pipes, it's specifically the esophagus, right? If you sever the trachea, that's not going to kill the bird. So this is our argument. Rav Nachman says either of the two. Rav Ada bar Ava says specifically the esophagus. Rav Nachman Amar Oveshto Kana. Rav Nachman says either one, because Echad Ketani. The Mishnah says you just need one. Doesn't specify. Echad Koldu, whichever one it is. Rav Ada bar Ava Amar, Rav Ada bar Ava, he reads the Mishnah mean, Vesht velo koneh, it needs the esophagus, not the trachea. My echad, what does it mean when it says the one? Miyuchad, the one that is more significant, right? That's the esophagus. As we said, even the slightest blemish in the esophagus is going to make the animal tropha, so therefore that is the significant one. Now we've got a back and forth. First, we're going to start asking questions on Rav Nachman, and then we'll see, we'll ask questions on Rav Ada bar Ava afterwards. So Rav Nachman says it could be either one. Here are some questions on him. Meisvei. So he asked the following question. Shachat es havesht. It says that if you did slaughter a bird and you severed the trachea, v'achar kach nishmata hagargeres, and then the esophagus. Sorry, did it again.
Yep.
Do it. Shachat es havesht.
It's not even Adar yet.
I know, it's going to do this over and over. I did I remember 7.5 years ago having the same problem. You slaughtered the esophagus, right? He shechted the esophagus. V'achar kach nishmata hagargeres. And afterwards, the gargeres gets disconnected. The gargeres is the connection between the pipes and the mouth of the animal. So the trachea gets pulled out. Good picture of that here. Not so much. Right, it was earlier. Oh, yeah, we do. Right here. Okay. So, right, he is, right? And he severs the esophagus, and then this pipe gets disconnected. The trachea gets disconnected. He doesn't cut it, right? He's just got knocked out of the way. Okay? So that's what happens. So if that happens, kshera, the bird is kosher. Why? Because he severed the esophagus first. Who cares after that? The bird's already dead after that, right? Nishmata gargeres, if, however, he's doing the shechita and he pulls out the trachea first, v'achar kach shachat es havesht, and then he slaughters, he kills, he severs the esophagus, psula, that's going to invalidate the shechita, because now, by severing the trachea completely, it is now a treifa, right? So therefore, that's non-kosher. Can't do that. Animal can't live like that. Shachat es havesht. Now, let's say the shochet goes in, and he does shechita on the esophagus, and he severs the esophagus. Nimtes gargeres shemuta. And then, when he's looking inside to see how he did, he sees that the trachea has been disconnected. He doesn't know which happened first. Because if he got the esophagus first, then it's fine. If he got the trachea out first, then it's not kosher. So what do? V'amru, so they Zehoya Maisa, this story happened. V'amru, and they said, Kol suffik b'shchita psula. If you have a suffix, like any suffix deoraisa, it's puzzle, right? So therefore, you're going to have to presume that this bird is not kosher, right? Now, would it be a nevela? Can't say it's a nevela, because that means that you're going all the way stringent and you have doubts. So therefore, that might be a different story. So we'll say it's psula, right? That it's right. It's going to be psula. Okay, so that's subject of discussion. Whether that according to various opinions, whether it is a treif or whether it's not, but whether it's an nevela or not. But in any event, not kriv. It's that puzzle. So that shchita is no good. Now. Ve'ilu shchita begargeres loktani. You know what the Mishnah doesn't say? We know what this brisa doesn't. This brisa doesn't say. This brisa doesn't tell you the opposite. What if you were slaughtering the trachea and you severed the esophagus? If you slaughtered the trachea first and then broke off the esophagus, would that be kosher or not?
I would say not.
Says Rav Nachman, it would be, right? Rav Nachman says it doesn't matter as long as you sever one of the pipes first. It's a kosher shchita. Why does the brisa not say that? Must be Reb Ada bar Ava is correct. And therefore, it doesn't matter what you do with the trachea. The esophagus has to be severed first. So, the answer is no. Mishum de gargeris avida lishtemute. The answer is no. It just happens to be that it's more common that the trachea will get disengaged more than the esophagus will. So therefore, the brisa isn't saying that it wouldn't be kosher if you slaughtered the trachea and then severed the esophagus, but it's just that that's less common. So therefore, we're going to mention specifically that, and it makes sort of sense because we said that the esophagus is closer to the spine. You've got to get past the trachea somehow in order to get to the esophagus. It sort of makes sense that if you got around the trachea and got to the esophagus and you were slaughtering, that you might poke and push the trachea out of the way with your knife or whatever. It sort of makes some sense that way. Okay, so that's not necessarily a proof against Rav Nachman. So we'll try again. Let's ask another question of Rav Nachman. Tashma would come and listen. Shachat shnei chatzoi simonim be'of psula. If you slaughtered two halves of the two pipes, so then that is not a valid shchita, because you didn't sever more than half of each one, right? For sure that's true of animals. So Rabbi Yehuda says, ba'of, when it comes to a bird, you've got to sever the esophagus, and you've got to be able to sever the two veins that are in the neck, we said carotid artery and the jugular vein. Got to get those as well.
And the Veridin.
The Veridin, right. So they're... So we will see why that is the case. Say this is necessarily probably not a bird, but even still, right? We can see that as you're looking here, this is your trachea, the esophagus. These are the large ones are the carotid artery and the jugular vein that are there, right? Nope, these are right. This is the Vrid Godel. This is the takes the blood back from the head to the heart, and from the heart to the head. So those are the big ones, and these are little ones. These are smaller veins that are in there, but these are the ones we want to cut. Okay, and even in a bird, we'll have these also, so you want to cut those. We'll see why Rabbi Yehuda holds you have to cut them. We haven't discussed why he says that, but it seems that the point of the question here is that Rabbi Yehuda says you've got to get the esophagus. So the Gemara explains it's not that you specifically have to get the esophagus, but he means mishum davesh samach levridin. The answer is that the esophagus is closer to the veins. If you were to go after the trachea, it's possible you can get to most of the trachea without touching the veins. So therefore, if you're going to get all the way up here to the esophagus, then you're going to get the veins. So therefore, that's why he says make sure you get to the esophagus. That way you get to the veins. And Rabbi Yehuda really cares about those veins. We'll see why later on.
Well, depends on where you position the knife as well.
Probably true as well, right? But you want to be able to get to that esophagus. But not to say that Rabbi Yehuda requires that you get the esophagus. It's that Rabbi Yehuda requires that you get the veins. Okay, so that's not necessary. Okay, good. So we'll try. Now we're going to ask questions against Rav Ada bar Ava, who indicates that you need to get to the esophagus. So Toshma shachad chatzi gargeres. Let's say he slaughters halfway through the trachea, v'shaha kedei shchita acheres, and then he takes a pause. and he pauses long enough for you to do a whole shchita, the amount of time it takes to do shchita, gemara, and then you finish the shchita so ksher, the shchita is still valid. That's not shehiyah. That's not long enough, right? We said the length of the shehiyah had to be enough to be able to ask the chacham to check the knife.
No matter, you think even a short pause would
right. So that's why we're pointing out that is not the case. That is not enough for it to be shehiyah. So now, my lav be'of. So what are we talking about? Aren't we talking about a bird here? My gemara. What does that mean? He finishes it. Gemara legargeris. That means that he finishes severing the trachea, and therefore you see that trachea is enough to be considered a shechita. So that's against Rav Ada bar Ava, who said that you need the esophagus, not the trachea. So the answer is low. No, what's going on here is babehema. We're dealing with the animal. Umay gemara. What do we mean that he finishes? Gemara l'shechita kula. He all he did was part of the trachea, and now he's got to go back and finish the rest of the trachea and the esophagus because he's got to go through 2 pipes by an animal. So that is what that Mishnah is talking about. So it's not a question against Rav Ada bar Ava. So we're asking another question against Rav Ada bar Ava. Tashma, come listen. Let's say half of the trachea was blemished. The hosif alav kol shehu ugmaro, and you stick your knife in there and you shacht and you finish it up. Shchita so ksher, the shchita is fine because the opening is not a blemish that would cause it to be a treifa. So as long as you get to the halfway point, now it's rov shechted and you shechted it with a knife. So we said that was fine. So my lav be'of, are we not talking about with a bird? Or my gemara, what does it mean he finished it off? Gemara lekana, he finished off the trachea. And that would be shchita. So the answer is low. No, we're talking about behema. We're talking about an animal. My gemara levesh. It means that he finished the trachea and then he got through all the way to the esophagus and he needed to sever both. Okay, so we'll ask another question. It's Rav Ada bar Ava. Toshma, come and listen. This one's going to work. Ketzad molkin chatas ha'of. How do you do malika, the fingernail service on the bird of a chatos? Chotech, you go with your fingernail from the shedra from behind the bird's neck, maprekes, and you go through the spinal cord below rov basar, but you don't go through the majority of the flesh in the back of the neck. We had said that you take sort of a side route to that. And then, ad shemagia levesht olekane, once you sever the spinal cord, then you get to the trachea or the esophagus. Higia levesht olekane, he gets the trachea or the esophagus. Chotich simon echad, all he's got to do is sever one of the two. This is a chatos that we're talking about, sever one of the two. V'rov basarimo, and then you go back and you get the remainder of the flesh that you had gone past before. Ube'ola, but when you're doing an ola service, then shnayim, then you got to sever both the trachea and the esophagus, as we said, because you're severing the head, so you have to sever both the trachea and the esophagus. O rov shnayim, or at least most of them. So therefore, you see clearly that either the trachea or the esophagus is enough. Tiyufta de Rav Ada bar Ava, that is a refutation of Rav Ada bar Ava. So, my haviola, so what's the halacha? What do you mean, my haviola? My haviola, what's the halacha? Kiddush, we just said, you need the trachea or the esophagus. No. Dilma, Shani also, maybe Malika's different than Shchita, because Deika Shidra Mafrekas, because you're breaking the spinal cord and you're breaking the bones in the back of the neck. That's killing the bird. Once you break the back of the neck, then all you need is one. Then the trachea is going to kill the bird. But what would be the halacha if it was? I don't know if that's the halacha when it comes to shchita, where you're just going after the one, you haven't severed the spine. Maybe the trachea is not enough. So fair point. Now. We're going to prove like Rav Nachman from a story that happened. Toshma, come listen. Dahu bar avza dahava beirava. There was a certain bar avza. Now I thought an avaz. Bro, you know your modern Hebrew. An avaz is a goose, right? Right. A barvaz is a duck, I think, right? But in any event, this is the Gemara language for a duck, right? It's a duck. Yep. So bar avza dahava beirava. Rava had a duck. Asa ki mimasmas koe dama. So it had some kind of blood around its neck. So it had some kind of neck injury. And they didn't know whether the neck injury was from it bleeding from whether the puncture went through the esophagus or whether the puncture is in the trachea. If the puncture is in the trachea, the animal's not a treifa and it's kosher shchita, or it can shecht it. If the puncture is in the esophagus, now the animal is a treifa and it's not going to be kosher. So, Amar Rava said, Heichi Navid, right? So what are we supposed to do? How are we going to shecht this duck? Nishchatei v'hadar nivdekei. Should we shecht it and then check it? So the problem is, how will you know that the hole wasn't in the esophagus, and then when you shechted it, you cut right through where the hole was? And now, when you check it, you're not going to see the hole because that's where you cut through the hole with the knife. So, nivdekei v'hadar nishchatei. What do you want us to do? Should we check it, look at it from the outside before we shecht it and then shecht it? Can't do that. Hamar Rabba said, Vesht ein lo bedika mi bachutz el mi befnim. You can't check an esophagus from the outside because the outside of an esophagus is red. The inside, there's 2 layers of skin on the esophagus. The outside layer is red, the inside layer is white. Checking for blood holes in the outside is a waste of your time. The whole thing is red. You're not going to see anything. The only way to check an esophagus to make sure that there's no holes in it is to take it and to turn it inside out once it's already shechted. And then on the white side, I can see if any blood came through. Like so. Right? So you take it and you turn it inside out, then I can check it, and now I know that there's no blood on the inside, then there were no holes. Without shech, I can't shecht it, because then that'll ruin the esophagus, and I can't check it without shechting it. So what am I supposed to do? So Amarli Rav Yosef, Bray, so Rav Yosef, the son of Rava, said to Rava, Nivdekei lekane, let's check the trachea. Let's check the trachea. Nishchata lekane v'lachshrei. Now you can investigate the trachea. You can see if it has a large enough hole because it has to be the majority of it, right? So you'll be able to take a look and see if there's a large enough hole in the trachea. Once we see that there's no big holes in the trachea, so then shecht it. That will make it kosher because you've severed the trachea. Once you've severed the trachea, now the hadar lafchuha levesh v'liv decay. Then once you've shechted it, then you can take out the esophagus later on and do an inspection.
How do you examine a trachea before you shecht it?
So remember, this is a bird that has a blemish on it already, right? They already saw blood coming out of its neck, so it must have had an open wound in the neck. Okay. So look in the wound, and you can see if the trachea is significantly damaged. Right? Remember, a pin prick or something like that's not going to be enough. It has to be a significant amount that the majority of it is cut away. So it would be visible, right? So the answer is take a look at that, and then when you see that it's fine, then shecht it, and then you're fine, good to go with the esophagus, right? Check the esophagus. So, from the fact that he told him that you could shecht it by cutting the trachea means that he holds like Rav Nachman, not like Rav Adabar Ahava. Good. Amar Rava was very proud of his son. He says, Chakim Yosef Bri, my son is so smart, but Trefos, when it comes to the halachos of Trefos, like Rabbi Yochanan, there's a story that we're going to see later on, that Rabbi Yochanan was an expert when it came to Trefos, so they used to send him whole animals full of, that were carrying whole kinds of questions. Here, check this one, check this one, check this one. He was the expert in it, so therefore he says, oh, my son is a brilliant Trefa guy, like Rabbi Yochanan is. Right? Alma, that is to say, Echad de Kamar, since he says that you can check with the trachea and that'll be a kosher shchita, oh hi, that it means that you can use either the trachea or the esophagus for a valid shchita. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda says, Ad sheyishchod. Now, Rabbi Yehuda was very important, you got to get those veins, right? When you're doing the shchita of a bird, got to get those veins. Why? So Rav Chisda, Lo Rabbi Yehuda el ba'of. Rabbi Yehuda really meant this by birds, not by animals. Hoil vet solehu kulo ke'echad. The reason is because birds are generally roasted whole, right? Rotisserie, right? Take the whole bird and you roast it whole. So how are you going to get the blood out of the bird? Right? You need to soak it and salt it and get the blood out. But if the bird is whole, you're not going to get all the blood out. So what you need to do is when you do shchita, you've got to get those veins so that most of the blood pours out after the shchita and it doesn't get stuck inside of the body of the bird. That's why you got to get to those veins. It's for blood purposes, not for shchita purposes. The shchita is fine, right? So theoretically, if you don't get those veins, then you could cut the bird into quarters, right? And then you can soak and salt it that way. That would be okay. right? But if you're going to roast the bird whole, then that's the general way that you do it. You got to get those veins. Aval behema, when it comes to an animal, kevan de minatcha aver. Animals don't get roasted whole. You cut them into pieces, right? You take out the steaks and you take out the shanks and you take out all the different parts. So lo tzarich, I don't need to worry about getting the veins out because once I cut it open, the blood is accessible and I can soak it and salt it and the blood comes out no problem. So that's different. Lememra, so that is to say, the time of the Rabbi Yehuda's whole reasoning why you got to get those veins is mishum damhu. He's trying to get the blood out of the bird. That's not, but we learned in the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda says, as havridin, that it sounds like the shechita is not kosher unless you get the veins. So the answer is, ema ad sheyinkov es havridin. You don't have to shechita on the veins, you just have to puncture the veins. So it sounded like from the Mishnah that Rabbi Yehuda requires you to slice the veins with your shechita knife. Well, why? If all you're trying to do is get the blood out, all you got to do is make sure the veins are open. So the answer is that's all he needs. All he requires is to puncture them. So why does the Mishnah say until you slaughter? Ad sheyinkov b'shas shechita means once you sever them during the shechita process, right? Whatever way you do it, doesn't make a difference whether you catch it on the edge of the knife or whatever. You just got to get those veins open. Toshma, so come and listen. Varidin b'shechita. Sounds like he says here very clearly that you need to do this, the veins with slaughtering during shechita. Div Rabbi Yehuda says. So the answer is no. The Gemara says, Ema vridin tzarech linakvan b'shas shechita. What it means to say is that you have to get those veins when you do shechita. Div Rabbi Yehuda. That's what Rabbi Yehuda says. So I ask again, Tashma from another brisa. Amru lo l'Rabbi Yehuda. The Chama said to Rabbi Yehuda, Me'achar shelo huskuru vridin el lo timei hadam. Since the whole point of shechita, of getting the veins, according to you, is by shechita, is in order to get the blood out. Ma'ali b'shechita, ma'ali shelo b'shechita. Who cares if I do it by shechita or without shechita? As long as I open the vein. Now, from that question, it seems to imply that Rabbi Yehuda was requiring that they sever the veins through shechita. So, Mikal, the Rabbi Yehuda savar shechita. B'shechita means that Rabbi Yehuda sounds like he says you're supposed to slice it with a knife during shechita. So, no, hachi kamri. This is what Rabbi Yehuda and the Chum were arguing about. Hachi kamri lei. They said to Rabbi Yehuda, if the whole point is to get the blood out, why do you have to sever the veins during shechita, do shechita, and then later on sever the rest of the head and dump the blood out? Why do you have to do it during the shechita? Vehusav Rabbi Yehuda held b'shas shechita asi dam dechayim. If you do it during shechita, the blood pours out when the animal's alive. The blood will come out easily. Shlo b'shas shechita, when it's not during shechita, lo asi dam, the blood does not flow dekarir because it congeals. Once it's already congealed in the animal, you're not getting it out. In the bird, you're not going to get it out. So therefore, you got to make sure that you do it during the shechita, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Boy, Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah asks the following question: Vridin Rabbi Yehuda. What happens if you've got the veins, according to Rabbi Yehuda, Shaha Bahen, Doras Bahen Mahu? What if you don't do them properly in shechita? Let's say you delay during you've sliced through the esophagus or the trachea, and then you take a couple second break, and then you slice the veins. What about if you chop? Right? Normally, those are things that are invalid by shechita. Amar le'ahu saba. So a certain elder, Hachi Amar Rabbi Elazar, he said that Rabbi Elazar had said v'amri la, and some said Amri le'ahu saba de Rabbi Elazar, and one said that the elder was Rabbi Elazar who said it. Hachi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. This Rabbi Yochanan says menakvan bekotz v'hein ksherim. It doesn't matter. You don't need shechita. You just need to puncture them. Take a thorn and puncture them. It's fine. It doesn't make a difference. Tanya kavase de Rav Chisda. We have a brisa that supports what Rav Chisda is saying, that Rabbi Yehuda only requires this as for birds, not for animals, because it says shachat shnei chatzai simanim be'of pasol. If you do shechita and you've severed half of the pipes, then that's not going to be kosher. You need to at least sever the majority of one of the pipes, but 2 halves do not make a whole. Vein tzarich lomar b'heiman. For sure, that's the case by animals. Rabbi Yehuda says, be'of, when it comes to birds, ad sheyishchot es havesht ves havridin. You've got to get the esophagus, because we said that's near the veins and the veins. So therefore, that's all. Got to get the veins. And that's by birds, specifically birds. The Mishnah then said, Chatzi echad ba'of, right? Then if you only get half of one of them by birds, that's not kosher, right? Because you got to get a majority. Itmar, so we asked the following question. Rav Amar Rav says, mechza kirov. If you slaughter exactly half, that's like the majority. That's considered to be enough. And the Rav Kahana Amar Mechza Mechza Eino Karov. And Rav Kahana says, half and half is not enough. Right? You got to be able to get the majority. Rav Amar Mechza Mechza Karov. Rav says it's the that halfway is like the majority. Why? Hachi Amar Le Rachman al Moshe. This is what Hashem told to Moshe. Hashem says, Lo Tishaya Ruba. When it says that you should not leave over, and Hashem says that you should do shchita, he means don't leave a majority intact. Rav Kahana Amar Mechza Mechza Eino Karov. Rav Kahana says no, halfway is not enough. Hachi Amar Le Rachman al Moshe. This is what Hashem was telling Moshe. Shachad Ruba. You've got to do a majority. You've got to do shchita on a majority. Not don't leave a majority, but you got to do a majority. Okay, so here's our proofs back and forth. Tanan, our Mishnah says, Chatzi echad ba'of, if you have half of one by a bird, echad v'chatzi behema, or 1.5 by an animal, shchita subsula, the shchita is no good. Now, Iyamart mechza mechza karov, if you told me halfway is enough, my puzzle, why is that not enough? Ha'avad le'rov, you've done the majority, right? Because that's what he said, halfway is the majority. So the answer is midirabanan. You're right, midaraisa, that would be valid. But midirabanan, they said, go further. Dilma lo asi lemebed pilga, because if you try to be so precise and you only get half, you might not get half, and then it won't be valid. Amar of Katina, so Rav Katina says, Toshma, come and listen from the following brisa. Chelko l'shnayim, if I've got a earthenware utensil, right? And now I want to purify this earthenware utensil. I cannot rely on the earthenware utensil to become, once it's tameh, I can't purify it, can't bring it to a mikvah. The only way I have to break it. So the larger piece, right? If you've got the larger piece, that piece is going to remain tameh. So he breaks this in half. Vein shavim, the two sides are exactly even. So shneim tamein, both sides stay tameh. Lefishi efshar litzamtim, because you can't figure out which one's the bigger one. One of them is, one of them isn't. It's impossible that they are exactly the same. This is a rule that we have in Shas that many people hold, that it's impossible that two things will be identical, right? Even though we say two things are a tie, it's impossible to really be a tie. We just don't know. So we've created a doubt. So I've got two items that look identical in size. I can't tell which one's which. So therefore, I've got to assume either one could be. They're both tameh. So now, ha'efshar litzamtim, that would mean to imply that if it were possible to measure them precisely, then tahorin, both of them would be tahor. It's only because I have a doubt which one is the larger one that they're tameh. If I didn't have a doubt and I knew neither of them was larger, then it would be tahor. Each one would be a broken utensil, and it would be tahor, which would mean to say that that half and half is like the majority, because you've broken, even though both are halves, each one has broken the majority. So amai tahorit, so zil hacha, so ikaruba, zil hacha, ikaruba. So why should that be? According to you, Rav, go to the first utensil, it's exactly half. That means it's a majority. You can go to the other one, it's exactly half. That means it's a majority, so they should be no good. So how are you explaining it? So Amar Rav Papa says, Trei rube bechad mana leka. The answer is because that is self-contradictory. You can't have two majorities in one utensil by definition, right? When you're looking at a pipe I have one cut. Is it the majority? Is it not majority? Halfway, I consider that majority. I've got two items. I can't take a look and say they're both majorities. That makes no sense. So that's a different case that doesn't count. Toshma, come and listen. Shachad chatzi gargeras. If you slaughtered and you have half of a trachea, v'shahaba kedei shchita acheres, and then you take a break and you have a whole amount of time it takes to do another shchita, v'gemara, and then you finish the shchita so kshir, the shchita is fine. V'amart mechza mechza karov. Now, if you're going to tell me that he got halfway and it's considered to be done, itrafala, so then once he's shechted half, and then he stops, so then it's as though he's not continuing in one motion. That means the first half is now done, and it's not a finished shchita. Why is he going back? So therefore, what you're doing is you're now just having a blemish, which is halfway. It's a treifa, and now you're going back and shechting it further. So why should that be allowed? So the Gemara answers, Mi savard bebehema. Are we talking about an animal here? We're not talking about an animal, right? Where you've still got a whole nother esophagus to slaughter. Rather, we're talking about ba'of. We're talking about a bird where slaughtering this trachea would be enough. So mimanov shach. So I got to look at it either way. If halfway is considered to be the majority, so then by doing the first half, you're already done. And if half is not enough, then he hasn't done anything. So it's still not treifa, right? Because then it's not done, and then you can go and finish up the shechita. So either way I look at it, that's why I can stop and then finish up. Because either I've done perfectly good shechita in the first slice, and now why am I going back to the second one? Midrabanan, it's better to continue on. Or otherwise, that the shechita halfway is not enough, in which case I go back and finish up with the other half, and it's fine. Toshma, come and listen. Haresha haya chatzi koneh. Let's say he slaughters half of the trachea. Pagum, and it's blemished. V'hosif alav, and now he slaughters a little bit more. Kolshu, the slightest amount. Ugmaro, then he finishes it off. Shchita sok shir, the shchita is kosher, as we said, because he's finishing up the shchita, is going past the majority. Now, if halfway is the majority, treifa havya, then once it's got a severed neck halfway, then isn't that considered to be enough? That's the rov, then it's already a treifa. So Amar Rabbi says, Shani linyan treifa. Treifa is different. When it comes to treifa, in order to be a treifa, it has to be a visible majority. Right? Exactly half is not enough for a treifa. Because to make it a treifa, you've got to have something significant happen to it. So it's by shchita, it's enough. But by a treifa, it's not enough. Amar Abai says, that makes no sense. Lo kol dekain, it's kavachomer. Lo kol dekudu. Ma betreifa de mashu mitarfa. When it comes to a treifa, where the smallest hole in some cases, right, by the esophagus, that's going to make a treifa. Hechat de ba'inan ruba. When you need a majority, ba'inan rova, nearly 9, you're going to tell me that you're going to need it to be a visible, significant majority. Shchita, then when it comes to shchita, da'adek aruba lo miskasha. By shchita, you always need a majority. Lo kol shekain de ba'inan rova, nearly 9. For sure, you need it to be a significant majority. If you're going to say shchita, that treifa needs a significant majority, then for sure by shchita, by shchita will as well. So then, Ella. So it doesn't make sense, right? The idea that you wouldn't need a majority by shchita doesn't make sense. Really, everyone agrees that when it's exactly halfway, it's not a majority. When Rav and Rav Kahana were arguing, they were talking about the rules of a korban pesach. Also this week's parsha, Pesach Sheni. If I have a community where the majority of people are tahor and 1 or 2 people are tameh, they do a korban pesach sheni, right? 30 days later, pesach sheni. Okay. What if the majority are tameh? Well, we learned in Maseches Vachim and again in Menachos that if the majority of the community is tameh, then when it comes to a korban tzibur, community offering, you can bring it betuma, and then you don't need a korban pesach sheni. What if it's exactly 50-50? That's where Rav and Rav Kahana are arguing. Rav says if it's exactly 50-50, so then it's like then it's already valid. It's like the community is already valid. Rav Kahana says no, you need 51%. Can't be 50%. 50 plus 1. So if you have a circumstance where the Jews are exactly halfway tameh and halfway tor, Rav Amar Mechza Karov, Rav says that 50-50 is going to be considered the majority, and therefore they can bring the korban pesach betuma. For Rav Kahana, Amar Rav Kahana says, no, Mechza ain't a Karov. Half and half is not the majority. Also, my time in the Rav. So why does Rav hold that way? Because it says by the korban pesach, ish ki yet tameh lenefesh, an individual person who becomes tameh, meaning ish nidcha ve'in tzibor nidchin. I understand halfway is not the majority, but they're not individuals either. Right? Less than half are individuals. Once you get to half, they're not individuals. Only individuals bring a korban pesach sheni, not a community. Therefore, Rav says if it's 50-50, there's no korban pesach sheni. Okay, it's a good place for us to stop.
Rov echad ba'of.
Yes, we're going to pick up by Rov echad ba'of.